open source is really important for, especially when it comes to assistive technology and digital accessibility.
Welcome to Fork Around and Find Out, the podcast about building, running, and maintaining software and systems. Managing role-based access control for Kubernetes isn't the easiest thing in the world, especially as you have more clusters and more users and more services that want to use Kubernetes. Open Unison helps solve those problems by bringing single sign-on to your Kubernetes clusters. This extends Active Directory, Okta, Azure AD, and other sources as your centralized user management for your Kubernetes access control. You can forget managing all those YAML files to give someone access to the cluster and centrally manage all of their access in one place. This extends to services inside the cluster like Grafana, Argo CD, and Argo Workflows. Open Unison is a great open source project, but relying on open source without any support for something as critical as access management may not be the best option. Tremolo Security offers support for Open Unison and other features around identity and security. Tremolo provides open source and commercial support for Open Unison in all of your Kubernetes clusters, whether in the cloud or on-prem. So check out Tremolo Security for your single sign-on needs in Kubernetes. You can find them at fafo.fm/tremolo. That's TREMOLO. Welcome to F18T, or as you'd like to call it, Fork Around and Find Outs generally. I realized today that your name is also 18 numbers in between. So C18N lines up perfectly with F18T. Oh. Autumn is looking at me as like the most, I'm the craziest person in the world right now.
This is only second to the time when he showed up bald and scared the out of me, okay?
For anyone that does not know, this is called a numeronym. All right, numeronyms are used pretty commonly throughout, especially technology, where you take the middle letters of a word and you make a number, however many letters are in between. So like accessibility, right? That is A11Y. That is the very common, because people are freaking lazy and they will not type it out. And so you do A11Y. Kubernetes, K8S. There are 8 letters between the K and the S. Kubernetes is a numeronym, K8S for that. Internationalization, I18N, observability, all these words they have numeronym representations. And I wanted to start off with that because Crystal is going to talk to us about accessibility in software. And I am super excited for it. Welcome to the show.
Yay. Well, thank you for having me. I did not know it's 18 between the C and the N.
I wrote it out on my little piece of paper right here, and I counted the letters. I made sure. And so,
that was
Autumn, you're still looking at me like I am the craziest person in the world.
I'm never sure if we're going to get a dad joke if we've gone down the neurospicy rabbit hole of a book, or if it's like math majorness, like it just, you never know what you're going to get with Justin.
It was just spelling today, and I can't spell in my head, so I had to write it out.
Don't lie, that's spelling and math. You put the numbers in everything.
This is algebra. This is
I have to say that a lot of people use the especially for accessibility, because when you're hashtagging and like that takes up a lot of valuable
character counts. We gotta
so I try to balance it out with I'll use accessibility the first time and then I'm using A11Y. I know it makes some people mad, but I'm like, I need more. I have a lot to say.
Well, I mean, and like that has been ingrained in me in every documentation I've ever written. Like spell out the thing first and then use the acronym, right? And like you can
I'm
do
glad it's
that.
ingrained in you, because the amount of people that throw around acronyms pretending like we're all supposed to know what they're talking about.
I mean, in written context, if I'm writing a blog post or a documentation or something like that, the first time I'm gonna say, even at AWS, right? Like AWS, you had to spell out Amazon Web Services the first time in official blog posts, and then you could say AWS. Like it was not allowed in a blog post or docs.
I worked there for 4 years and I still got blogs and review, and I haven't worked there for 2 months. They're never getting out, y'all.
I once freelanced for a place, and then I left for like a year and came back, and I got assigned tickets that I had put in a year before. Like, But they also didn't realize I had left. They thought I
Lazy?
had just changed floors.
Tell me somebody came back for a stupid edit and was like, can you move the in this sentence?
When I left Disney, the last thing I did was I was writing a blog post and they wouldn't let it go out because I left before it was like going to be published. And so they changed all the author names and like put a little like tagline at the bottom, like this blog post had like credit to Justin or whatever. It's like,
doesn't that
no
make
longer
you
works
mad
here.
though? Because like in any big corporation, that one blog takes 6 to 8 months of 3 people sitting on it, sending it back and forth, giving you the dumbest edits that don't matter. And then they'll be like, oh, well, like you worked on this for 2 years, but okay, bye. Like I was working there while you did it.
It's okay. They paid you. It's fine.
That's my solace for everything.
Crystal, so how did you get into focusing on accessibility in software? Why is that important? I want to just start there. Let's go there and we have lots of other places to go with the conversation.
Oh, I got so much like rabbit hole stuff that I'm going to talk about. Like we're about to get so off topic. So let's go there first.
Well, to do a very short, around like 10 years ago, I started to really lose my vision. I've always had one functional eye, but my other eye, my left eye kind of showed up and showed out and it's like, hey, you can still do everything. I'll do everything that your right eye can't do. But then about 10 years ago, I noticed I started to lose my vision wasn't, I was getting glasses and I'm like, that's not working. Maybe it's because I went to Lens Crafters and the glasses were $15. Maybe it's that. Come to find out, I ended up I have a visual impairment that came about. And in conjunction with that, I started out as a front-end developer. I worked in journalism, usually in the interactive departments of a few newspapers. And then I kind of, journalism around 2009, 2010, I worked at a paper that had been open for 149 years and closed right before its 150th year. And I'm like, I don't know if this continuing on in journalism is probably good. So I switched over to front-end development, which makes all the times that I skipped and dropped out of college to learn how to code and stuff like worth it. So I was doing front-end development, kind of did a little bit backwards and moved into quality assurance because I was like, this is kind of like journalism. I really like kind of discovering why something is not functioning correctly. So I was doing that, and one day I was working for a company and I got a ticket that said, test JAWS for this application. And I did not know what JAWS was. I was, overall, I had a, kind of a little bit of familiarity with, accessibility tools were, but not like the actual individuals. I didn't have that much knowledge. And I'm like, what does that mean? So after kind of trying to figure out JAWS is a screen reader, just to let you know, and I would do the whole it stands for this because I completely forget. So maybe you can put a little asterisk of JAWS stands for this. Crystal forgot this while she was talking.
That happens to me all the time.
Even though she deals with this stuff every day, she forgot what the acronym is.
Right. Even the acronyms, we absolutely know what they are. Yeah. We do not remember all of the time what they mean.
That's why I made Justin stop giving me acronym tests because I was like, Justin, I know what it does. I don't know why it's need this.
Wait for this game for this month because that's an acronym test. It's a fun one.
Do you see what I have to put up with? Okay. It's job access with speech.
Yes, exactly. I deal with so many acronyms throughout the day. I'm just I know what it does, and that's
I don't even know how people got through life before Google. Okay, the amount of things I have to Google for acronyms between working in tech and being on dating apps, I'm always just like, what are we talking about? Damn it. Are y'all just making up words at this point?
I want to see a Venn diagram of that intersection of.
I was on dating apps and I didn't know what it took me a while to figure out non-ethical monogamy meant.
They got 5 names for that one thing, and I'm like, just says wants to do everyone. The struggle out here is real. Okay? See, we're right here. You understand me. Okay.
Yes.
Also, so were you writing when you were a journalist?
I kind of started out doing freelance. I worked for a alternative weekly here in Denver called Westward. And so I contributed a lot to the calendar section. So it's like, oh, go to this club or this band. And then eventually I became the web editor. I was fired because it was one of those things of like your first really big person job. And I'm like, you can't really cry in the cubicle and keep your job.
Unless you work at Amazon, you can definitely cry in the cubicle. I've had too much coffee this morning. Who let me on this show?
That was spicy. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
That one. To all of our AWS ex AWS colleagues out there, you know what it's like. But I guess not at newspapers, huh? They don't like that. As a web editor, you're not allowed to.
The funny thing is that I was in conflict, kind of some of the higher ups, because they had moved from WordPress to movable type. And I was like, why did you do that? I don't know why, because I was like, well, if you want your reporters to actually contribute to online, because this was like back in 2007. And so you didn't have a lot of reporters that were really contributing to like writing on like for blogs and stuff. And I was like, maybe we can go back to WordPress. They were like, no. And then now I'm like, I feel vindicated because no one, when I mention movable type, people are like, what is that?
Not just that, but I mean, let's just be real. The only reason why WordPress is still a thing is because they got everybody in a monopoly death grip of the internet. Yeah. So like, Crystal's vindicated. Like, I'm sorry I told you the future, and then you made me cry, jerk.
Then you made me cry in the cubicle, and the
amount of women in tech, though, that situation has happened to, where you write, they tell you you're wrong, you got to go cry in a cubicle, and then it's your fault. Like, I'm just like, oh, we've heard this story before. It's our whole career.
And one of the funny things, like I was really concerned about accessibility even back then before I really learned about digital accessibility, because I remember in my interview for the web editor position, I talked about the flashing ads and I brought up Pokemon. I was like, have you ever watched Pokemon before? And I was like, going through the case of how the episodes caused kids who had seizure disorders health risk. And so I was like, these ads are the same. And you have a responsibility for people who are using your website. So it's funny because even when I wasn't like, this is, digital accessibility, I had always been kind of concerned about that in kind of my, and throughout my roles, even though that was like me being a web editor, because I'm like, well, I'm concerned about the web part of this paper. So,
but I love that. That means you were meant for that, but you just didn't know what it was called yet.
And then I cried, and then I eventually left. And
that's because you were too good for that job. They didn't appreciate you. It's okay.
Yes. But when I was doing quality assurance, getting that ticket for JAWS, I'm like, I don't know what this is. And ended up rejecting the ticket because I was like, hey, you can't really ask someone who's never used this software before to test this is going to be accessible, to especially something like JAWS, that it has kind of a high kind of learning curve. But that from that point on, I was like, you know what? One, I want to learn more. Two, I know like my vision is not really great. So maybe this can be something that can help me out. And then from there, I really just kind of started digging into accessibility. And first, I was just like, okay, how do I find more about it? And there were information. It wasn't like now where there's more information. I'm not going to say there's, a plethora of information about digital accessibility, but there's definitely more now than when I first kind of started back in 2014. And so a lot of times that's also how I started doing a lot of public speaking, because I would find out things. And I'm like, I'm going to share this with everybody else in my predicament of like, here's how to get started with digital accessibility. Here are these, introductory things that you should know. And then hopefully you'll kind of do like me and learn more. And so that's really how I kind of got into it. And the more I got into it, the more it helped me out with my visual impairments, because I do sometimes need to use a screen reader. And that's been really great. I actually went to the doctor and I had the optometrist, and they were like, you haven't been here in like years. And they were like, why? And I was like, well, I didn't need to use my prosthetic lens because I just use a screen reader for work. But through that, I've, been able to inform people about accessibility, but also help myself as well. Probably shouldn't have done that. I'm please, anyone listening, don't do that.
That's super interesting though. Just the idea that like you can use a tool to offset like solving the problem or helping the problem more. Like I can just work around this, which is what a lot of us do, is like, this is more convenient to like just do it the hard way than to try to go schedule appointments. And
I think that's common with a lot of people with disabilities. Like my son, when he was having a hard time with reading, he'd get Alexa and everything else to either talk to text or to read it for him. But he was struggling with autism and ADHD and dyslexia. So it was so much work that it was easier for him to find ways around it than to deal, or he would have a hard time writing. So he would type it or he would talk to text it. And I was like, well, I don't want you to not learn how to write. And then the doctor in the school was like, but I mean, we're all going to type one day anyways. And I was like, that's valid.
You're absolutely right. Even though I only need one lens because my right eye is strictly, I don't need, it's like, I don't need a lens for that, but it's expensive. Like for a lens for my, like a hard lens for my left eye is around $1,500, $2,000. It's a lot of money. And that's the thing of, I realized I have, I'm kind of privileged to be able to pay that, but it's not to say it's not, it's still expensive. But there are a lot of people who that is absolutely not affordable in any way. And they are having, they'll have to find ways around that to access what they need. And so even when we're pushing, I know we're kind of all over, but when it comes to, accessible assistive technology, a lot of people forget that, they're thinking about, well, software and digital things, but a lot of assistive technology is also for people who have mobility issues with their hands. They can use a mouse stick or a head stick where they have where you can strap it onto their forehead and to type and do things like that. Because depending on what is needed, not everything can be solved with digital technology. And so that's something I always really try to stress to people. It's like, yes, we're in the digital age, we're in the internet age, and there's a lot of things that we can do to make life better for people with disabilities, but also just, everyone in general. But that doesn't mean that the digital solution is always the best. So it's funny when you're talking to like a developer or designer and they're like, and I'm like, sometimes what you're doing right here, that code you're putting out, that diagram that you have for me, maybe that's not the best solution. That usually rarely like happens because usually I'm dealing with actual components and applications. But I always like to make people think about that kind of like out of the box, thinking about solutions for accessibility.
Because sometimes we get to the point where we want to solve everything with a hammer, and the hammer's not always the right thing for the job. I think it's super rad, though, that you had so many different almost like callings to the same path with your own personal like struggles, but it made your life better. But then also you were already interested in other ways and other industries about you. Like it just shows that how valuable you are as like a domain expert in that situation, because like look at how many different ways you bring value to that, and you are an expert in that field. But you can also talk about your personal experiences, and you're not just somebody who rolled up and decided it was cool and didn't really do the work. But also it's so cool that you're actually really passionate about it and you want to share the information, because a lot of times just doing it to do it isn't the same, so it's really cool that you've
some of the most welcoming communities I've ever experienced were in disability circles, right? Like I had friends that were deaf in college, and I have like, there's been so many situations where it's like the desire to share in that community is so strong to help everyone else get better and to deal with the world, right? Because the world is not
set up for these things. And it's like people are like, I have a new mouse joystick that works for me in this situation, but it doesn't work with this software or something. And someone else like, oh, I have that solution. In a lot of ways, the open source ethos of like, we are just going to do the right thing for the community is so alive and well in disableds, anyone that needs accessibility. Like those communities to me have always like carried that on more so than open source. We're like, I get to make some money off this now, right? Like it's like shifted in a lot of ways where it's like, oh, you can see the code, you can't have the code. There's a lot of things that have happened in what used to be open source 40 years ago. And I feel like communities that have kept that going are the ones that like, I need this to live, to have a better life, to have my friends have a better life or my family, whatever. I'm going to go deep into this topic and I'm going to learn everything about it. And then I'm going to go tell you about it. Exactly what you're saying with like giving conference talks and writing and stuff.
I think it's sad because a lot of medical research is done for either the military, which means you have to be, a lot of their target audience is men between the ages of like, what, I think 18 and 36. So if you think about how many like Black women or disability or people with disabilities who are never brought into the medical conversation. So people like, think about how many times you've seen a parent on GoFundMe raising money to push a drug forward because it's a drug for rare situations or rare disease, and their kid's going to die if someone doesn't do that. You know, like it gets to the point where you have to advocate for yourself and your children because there's so many gaps for the disabled community and for a lot of underrepresented medical communities that you have no other choice. If you look at open source, what is open source? It is people solving a problem because it's usually something that they needed. So the two really mesh.
Yeah, and open source is really important for, especially when it comes to assistive technology and digital accessibility, of people really having that drive to going, finding open source projects, to submit tickets for, to correct issues about, something that's inaccessible. There's so many accessibility experts who are out there who spend their time, their free time, valuable free time, putting in tickets, joining, open source projects to make sure things are accessible for people with disabilities out there. And it's also important from the kind of focus of things like right to repair, because when someone is relying on technology to provide them access, sometimes companies go out of business. Sometimes particular applications are sunsetted and things like that. But it's not easy for someone with disability to just switch to a newer thing or find an alternative. And so they're either stuck without something that is required for them to have a good quality of life, or going into debt and bankruptcy to get that. So things I'm in Colorado. I think it was either last year or the year before, having the right to repair, because sometimes when it comes to digital technology, or assistive technology, like wheelchairs, the right to, some states don't allow that to happen because companies are like, well, if you do that, you void a warranty. Well, we won't honor the warranty that you have, or it's just, you can't do it. And the thing is, it is very important, because the thing is, it's like, well, what can I, do? There's been, the open source community is very important when it comes to digital accessibility.
I love that you tie that together with the right to repair, because it's totally what it's, because for physical disabilities of mobility, that is I have to get to the store, I have to get to my doctor's, but I have to be able to fix the thing that allows me to do what other people take for granted, or other people say oh, this is just whatever. But tying that to software right to repair as well, where it's hey, Microsoft deprecated Windows whatever, and I needed that because my software only worked with it, and I don't have the source code, I don't have the ability to repair that thing anymore, is another critical piece of right to repair goes to software. If it's not open source, we have to be able to protect people that I need to, and people are crazy dedicated when it's their livelihood, right? They're I have to be able to do this. I will open a hex editor and start mashing keys and figure out how to get around your whatever constraints in your deprecation so that I can function as a human in society.
It even goes beyond right to repair, because I'm a huge component for updating your version of Java. We know that. But sometimes girl, don't just.
We're 30 minutes in, Java's there. All right.
But, well, it's important, though, because Apple changed their API for Macs at a certain point, and a lot of the accessibility features for Java were not compatible. So they needed to be backported from a later version of Java. But at a certain point, you stop you stop doing backports and doing certain like levels of maintenance for older LTSs. So you're just going to do security and important backports, right? But one row of backports I did, it was accessibility, and it was to an LTS that we weren't going to actually start doing backports unless they were security or important. But you have to fight like, dude, these people need these things and they can't use their computers, and not everything is going, like, we can push people all you want to upgrade, but not everybody's going to listen, and it affects those people's lives. And then just trying to get it to work with things that just aren't compatible, and trying to bring that back. And then you have to lobby. This is really important, even though it's this huge burden and it's not for an LTS that we're supporting. So we didn't end up getting them all done, but I was like, let's get as many done as possible, because it's like the slider, that there's so many UI parts that people don't realize that you have to do it. So that was one of the best contributions to open source, is being able to fix those accessibilities and to like backport them, and being able to like make it work for those versions. Because what if those people don't have access to whatever program? Sometimes there are programs that they need, and like we all do, like digital therapy, we do all kind of things. And when you're disabled, you might not have the mobility to get to a doctor's appointment or to get somewhere. Maybe that's how you take in conferences or you do your job.
It's always wild to me that sometimes you'll get people who get it up, they'll understand about security, but not understand that accessibility really is, on that same level.
It should literally be on par with, if you're going to put security updates to that LTS, you should also do accessibility.
Yes. I wrote a little while ago about InfoSec and accessibility and password managers, because a lot of password managers in the past weren't really, accessible, that leaves you open to a vulnerability. Also, being open to the fact that, I know one thing, there's this book that it's a physical book that's like the book of passwords. And people are like, don't put your passwords in there. But it's a thing of, well, if I can't physically have my password and the password manager is not accessible to me, well, I could use the same password over and over again. And then you have a vulnerability of, of your data, because, well, your password, it's not going to be a 20 character password with like symbols. It's going to be something that you can remember, and you're using it at, 100 different sites and things like that. I tell people, it's like, well, if you're concerned about security, you also have to be like accessibility, not just front end. It goes throughout like the technology, like digital technology everywhere. It's one of those things like accessibility is important. It's on the same level with many things that we think of. And it's not, this is something a lot of accessibility experts say. Accessibility is not an afterthought, and it really is not. It's a cliched saying, but it's cliche for a reason.
One of the things I think is interesting where that overlaps is, I remember back in the day when accessibility features in Windows and on websites ended up being the vulnerability. Right? Where they're like, oh, guess what? I can open up prompts on a Windows login screen because I can click the screen reader, which then opens a way for me to get to see, like whatever the process was just like, oh, these pieces that were afterthoughts ended up being the vulnerability. And if you would have integrated that ahead of time, you could have avoided these things, and you could have known, oh, why wouldn't I want to have a prompt at a login screen? Those things are important. And that's super interesting. And you also reminded me, years ago, my mother-in-law was like, she was signing up for a website or whatever, a new streaming service. I don't remember what it was. And she pulls out a little notebook and she wrote down the password. She's like, oh, you probably don't like that I do this. I'm like, I think that's fantastic. I was like, I love that you do that. I don't want you to you don't have to use a password manager. She's like, write it down somewhere so you have a unique password that maybe you can't remember. Because if you can't remember, it's probably long and has something complex in it that might be better than you just saying like, oh, it's dog 123, right? Like that's not a great password. So absolutely, like I think that's fascinating when there's overlap there too of like, oh, maybe the best practice doesn't fit every situation, and at some point it is just a practice for some people, and we have to throw those rules out the window when it's just not going to work, and we have to be aware of those things too.
I think that's one of our biggest hindrances in security, is that we build these security features for technology, and to combat certain aspects of technology, but we forget that the biggest, weakest link is humans, right? So if we don't make technology practices and security practices where it fits human nature, and part of that is we're all built differently. Our brains work differently.
It's not the ideal. Here's the one.
Like, I'm just like, okay, think about the amount of people that we know are super neurospicy in tech, and we're going to pretend like we're going to remember passwords to every different thing. Be real. What did you have for lunch yesterday, Autumn? I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? I am the worst with passwords, with a whole software and security degree over here. If you look at so much of security, it is definitely human psychology and how we interact with tech, right? And like how our biases and so many things. And if you're not taking accessibility in with that, you're setting people up for failure. If that isn't part of the conversation, how can we truly make products and best practices and put things in place? Because what's going to happen when it doesn't work for you? You're going to go around it, which makes it even more insecure. I feel like I'm like on this new like thing of preaching, like, for one, how is human psychology and accessibility and just all of how we interact with technology, what is that intersection? And then like the world has changed so much in the last couple of years, right? Like we've had so many advances.
This month has been a world change.
Okay, we're all around the same age, right? Like in high school, think about what you could do from your phone. Think about how you interacted with the world.
Hold on.
Later, much later. And it was because I was left unattended, okay? Like, it was not because it was good. It was because for all the wrong reasons. So think about it, right? Our laws, the way that we just think about things has not caught up with technology. We are not securing things in a way that is with this level of misinformation, just how humans interact with it. Like, you need a phone for everything. People will be like, oh, well, if the millennials didn't buy that iPhone and that coffee, what can you do without a phone now? We literally are setting up a program to help people who are unhoused fill out applications and stuff, because you can't even get help to be housed without technology.
I totally, like, I remember my own mind shift of like thinking when I was younger and I would see people that were unhoused with phones, and I'm like, they can afford a phone, they should be able to afford something else. And then like realizing it later that like I can't do anything without a phone. They have to have that.
But do you see how you had a mind shift and your brain was open? Trying to understand and explain that to old dudes and try to tell them why we're advocating for this, they will fight you to the death. And I'm just like, I need you to open your brain to other people and their experiences that are different than you.
It's like, oh, well, you can apply for a job. Like, you can just go in. The amount of places that will kick you out if you try to go in and try to apply, places like Walmart or Target, like if you go in and say, hey, I want to apply for a position here, no, they send you to it. Like sometimes if they have a kiosk there, they'll send you to that kiosk, or they'll just say, go home and apply online. And it's like, no more can you like, oh, walk the pavement, beat the pavement and go around to different companies and hand out your resume, because that's a sure way to get your resume into the trash.
And half the time people are so understaffed, they don't have time to talk to you. And it's wild. Like, you'll see people like indignant giving this advice, and you're like, have you thought about how the world has changed since you gave that advice, or since you made these social constructs of what you think trying hard and working hard is? Because you're not even being understanding of the situations that most humans are in. There are whole like organizations that we were thinking about how to volunteer for Bell's House Coders, and we're like, well, what about all the people that don't even... Washington is one of the states that has really great different programs, but you have to be able to have access to those programs. You have to know that they exist, right? So like, it's cool that they're out there, but if you don't have somebody giving them a way to sign up for them and teaching them how to do it. So it's like, it's just wild how what's technology and what is also like multiple human factors that you need to add into that to make using that technology successful. Running Kubernetes at scale is challenging. Running Kubernetes at scale securely is even more challenging. Access management and user management are some of the most important tools that we have today to be able to secure your Kubernetes cluster and protect your infrastructure. Using Tremolo security with Open Unison is the easiest way, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, to simplify access management to your cluster. It provides a single sign-on and helps you with its robust security features to secure your cluster and automate your workflow. So check out Tremolo Security for your single sign-on needs in Kubernetes. You can find them at fafo.fm/Tremolo. That's TREMOLO.
Crystal, how has accessibility in software changed since you started diving into it?
That's a good question.
Understanding it.
I mean, we kind of hit upon it. Like, really, one of the big changes is to kind of focus, a lot more smartphones and tablets and things like that, and watches and things like that. And the thing is that I've really only started focusing on accessibility around like 2015, 2016. So that's been the biggest thing. The web accessibility content guidelines back the 2.0 didn't even have really dedicated criteria guidelines about mobile accessibility. And that came in the update for WCAG 2.1. And I remember one of my first dedicated jobs with accessibility was kind of mapping WCAG 2.0 to mobile accessibility, because I was testing native Android and iOS applications. But it was really hard to do that, because going by those guidelines, they weren't really for mobile applications. So a lot of my time was not just testing, but trying to figure out, okay, this is what this particular guideline say, and this is for desktop. How does that apply to? And so that's been the biggest thing, is that because there is a shift with software that younger millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're not using desktop. And that's the same for younger people with disabilities. They're not using, desktops. And so that really means that there has to be a focus on accessibility for mobile applications and mobile devices. So that's been the biggest, shift. And I think also just the fact that there is more information out there. There could always be more because there is a fight to really, because there is still a lot of ableism when it comes to accessibility in technology. There's a lot of people who still think disabled people don't use the internet and use technology, which again blows my mind. But there really is a lot of people unfortunately in places that make, decisions that do think that, oh, well, our users they don't have disabilities, so why should we care about accessibility? So those are the two biggest things, that there is more knowledge around, accessibility. There's really, and especially when it comes to software engineers and developers with different frameworks, like, you have React and in Vue and all these, where there are dedication to making sure that people are able to develop components right from the very start that are accessible. That's something I'm really encouraged, but there's so far to go, because you can provide those tools, you can provide those frameworks, but it doesn't mean anything if people don't know how to correctly implement them, and there's no initiative in the places that they work to make sure that is happening.
Is that a piece of practical advice you'd give to anyone listening to the show, like a developer? How would I make my software more accessible? It sounds like using some of those frameworks is just step one. Like, don't roll your own. You're not going to have the rest of the stuff in it that would be accessible for people in various states. And I'm sure React and Vue and some of these more popular frameworks, at least, already try to adhere to the web accessibility standards, right? They're like, oh, we're going to implement some of the features that are required at a fundamental level.
Yeah, at a fundamental level that, there's really good documentation. I know I'm in the midst of kind of reskilling myself. So I know there are tons of frameworks out there I'm needing to get familiar with, but a lot of them do have documentation of how to go about using these frameworks to make sure things are accessible. And it's really the want and desire of reading that documentation to do that correctly. Also, this is another kind of cliche within the accessibility community, but it's very important. And that is using semantic HTML, because I kind of consult with developers all the time. That's kind of part of what I do. And a lot of the issues that I come about is because they're doing kind of really custom things, and that really, had they used like semantic HTML, then it wouldn't have been an issue. And then that's when it comes with ARIA, which is, I was actually just talking about this on social media just the other day. I know I'm kind of jumping around with this. If you can't use semantic HTML, then you can use ARIA, and ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And really, that's for ARIA is when you can't use semantic code to make custom like widgets and components accessible using the elements of using the header element or H1 and H2s, because assistive technology, screen readers and other assistive technology, they understand what those elements are for structurally. So that's the thing of, if you use semantic HTML, then screen readers and other assistive technology are better able to read the site, the application that the person is using it on. If that does not happen, then you'll need to use something like ARIA to kind of make up the difference. The thing is that a lot of times when they don't use semantic HTML, then there's a report that something it's inaccessible, then they'll go to use ARIA. But a lot of times people developers do not understand ARIA. Because when their first introduction to ARIA is they have a ticket to fix a bug. It's not truly realistic, because a lot of times developers are dealing with legacy code that they can't go in and refactor and do things like that. So it's not, so don't use ARIA. It should be more of, if you do have to use ARIA, you need to know how to use it correctly and understand it. And that's something that, I really press upon developers. It's like, please learn that. It shouldn't be your go-to. But I understand that you're not you don't control the whole code base. So you can't go ahead and do everything, but understand how to do this correctly, because if you're doing it incorrectly, it really does have a major effect depending on what you're working on. That this could mean someone is there, they can't access an application, and that application can mean the difference between them not getting to a program, losing opportunities and things like that.
How can people get context for learning ARIA and stuff? Also, I have another follow-up question after this point.
I just opened their docs, and I love their opening statement of basically use native HTML elements and attributes wherever possible. ARIA is a fallback. Don't try to shove this in there. And then their first example, this is great docs, just pulling this up, because the very first example has a HTML a div, and it's if you have a progress bar, here's how you add the value now, the value at minimum, the value at maximum. And that's how someone can see a progress bar loading without being able to see it if that attribute or if that piece on the page isn't already accessible. And that's a great start right there. I love that.
W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative has really, really good documentations on ARIA. Also, that's where Web Accessibility Content Guidelines is as well. That's kind of the first thing when I'm meeting with a developer, those are the first things I'm pulling out, because it's all there and there's so many great people that contribute to these initiatives. It's the first place to go, and it's one of the best. A good fundamental grasp of how to really start developing and, for accessibility and fixing issues of inaccessible issues.
We all know it's hard to get into open source, and it's not always welcoming to everyone, and we're trying to change that. And open source is going through a lot right now. But do you think that it's easier for people to kind of point out and ticket and kind of add a voice and get a seat at the table in open source than it is a major FANG company? Because it's really hard to give a voice and to draw attention to the things that we need to change without having a seat at the table, and people from that may deal with disabilities to be able to say, hey, this is not working for me. And I would like to think, in theory, being able to open a ticket on GitHub and having, to be able to join Slack for an open source project or make comments on GitHub would be more accessible to at least show people, hey, I'm struggling with this part. Do you think that that is a way that we can make better software?
I think it is more accessible. Is it easier to get. That's kind of debatable. Where trying to talk to like corporations and things like, unless you're someone who's like working inside the company or is a customer that, has spends a lot on products and stuff, it can be a lot harder to do that. And so with, open source projects, it is as easy as submitting an issue on GitHub and things like that. But something I have noticed is that sometimes like they'll submit issues and they'll just sit there and people will sometimes I have seen people write out well, why does this matter? This is not something that really matters for this project. And that is very disheartening. And it's for someone who is maybe new to accessibility that can really discourage. Now, there are a lot of old heads for accessibility. They're not letting that stop them. They will submit tickets. They will follow up. There's some really cool people they have thicker skin. But there's a lot of like newer people that who are new to accessibility who, really mean well, but, and they'll do this and they're like, I submitted a ticket. And it's like, awesome, great. And they're thinking, well, now this is going to get solved. And I'm like, whoa, let's put a break on your expectations. Like it's, hopefully that will happen. Maybe you will have to do a lot of pushing on that. Sometimes you really do. But yeah, I do think it's more accessible. I don't know if it's easier to get accessibility dealt with.
We've been talking all of the accessibility, or at least most of the accessibility has been focused on the front end, web interfaces, applications, screen readers. Have you done any accessibility for audio, text to audio or screen readers for like terminals, for backends, for command line? That seems like, I was just trying to think like, how does that get implemented? Or
I wish I had the opportunity and probably, maybe one day, I really will. There are people that do that, but I haven't really ever had the opportunity to work on things like that.
If any of our listeners know about something along those lines, a tool or a console, like a terminal emulator that like supports screen reading, because I was trying to think like how I would grep logs, how I would do the things that I commonly do as a sysadmin doing operations, to be able to, because there's so much information. Like I would be reading a book every time I try to like grep out the Apache logs or something.
Well, you can still, because I know plenty of visually impaired and blind developers, and they still use the terminal. And these are developers that use both Apple and Mac and Windows. And the thing is, I don't know all the different, accessibility tools for that. But usually, yeah, they're using JAWS. A lot of times, if they're on a Mac, they're obviously having to use VoiceOver. So that's the thing. That's something I also trying to dispel. I know so many awesome blind developers who are just great at building things and things like that. And it's one of those things of, it's really a shame that people don't realize that, because they think, well, obviously you can't see, you can't code and stuff like that. That is not true. I remember one of my very first jobs that focused on accessibility, my coworker, Ethan, he was great. And I was always going to him to ask like coding questions and things like that, because he was awesome. Like also his screen reader was very fast. And so I would always hear it. So even before I got really good at using my screen reader, I was so used to so now when I use a screen reader and I'm demoing an issue and things, I have to turn my rate down really, really slow, because I'm so used to using it. It's like, ship part of the reason is because before I was so used to hearing Ethan's.
I have two more questions. One is we talked about how open source enables people to repair their software and things. I've for a long time been impressed with how much accessibility features Apple has put into the iPhone. iOS, I feel like, has done a lot in just making some things functional that I didn't know existed, that I use some of those tools just because I'm like, this is convenient and I like it. It's a closed source platform. If you don't fit that mold or you don't have the thing, I feel like Android would be better at some of those things just because it has more of an open ethos or more deep integrations into doing something in the system. From your experience, has one platform been better than the other, Android versus iOS, for accessibility? It's your opinion. It doesn't matter. Like, I mean, everyone can have an opinion here.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious from your experience.
So the thing is that personally, I like my work phone is iOS and my personal phone is Android. I prefer Android. I feel there's a lot more when it comes to accessibility features and tools for me, and so that's why I use it. iOS, I think, really for a long while was really the kind of star and standard when it came to accessibility that really took it seriously. So now it's really about, if that's what you've spent years and years using for your accessibility needs, it's just easier. It's the reason why when people, just like someone who doesn't use the iPhone for accessibility and they switch to Android, and then they're like, even if it has a lot of the things that they want, but they're like, I don't like it because it's not what I'm used to.
Yeah. Familiarity is so important. And all it's like, and that goes right back to the deprecating software and even like site redesigns and everything. Like that throws everyone for a loop when it's like, oh, like now everything is different. And they're like, oh, we launched the site. We're going to get to the accessibility features. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it. I'm like, no, like you didn't launch the site. It's not complete. Like, stop it.
I mean, for me, because I do use like the one screen reader I can say I'm really good at using is TalkBack. And that's because I really started using a screen reader on my phone. And obviously I had Android. And so that was TalkBack. Google's Lookout, which was really built for blind and visually impaired people, because when I need to like read something on my medicine, like, so because a lot of times it's super, super tiny. I can hold it up to my face. I won't be able to read it. So being able to like take snapshots of, have it tell me what something is for me, and then now there's so much more, and they're constantly doing innovations and things like that and adding more features. But the same thing is true about Apple as well. So it does really come down to, well, how long have you been using it? And then two, what are you more concerned about? Do you really want that freedom of being able to build for it? Because you can definitely do that on the, Android side versus on Apple. So it really does come down to that. And so that's why I'm kind of like, you can make cases for both. For me personally, I like Android. I won because it was the price, but now that doesn't even matter because now most of
all right, and my last question, I say the most, maybe the most spicy, but the one I was really interested in and I didn't want to talk about the whole time. How has the current implementation of AI, generative AI, affected accessibility? Has it at all? Has been changes in that either things are more difficult or things got better? I'm really curious, like how from that perspective, anything has kind of bled over into this like world of, we made it one way, we shipped it really fast and half of it doesn't work. But is it doing any good in the accessibility world?
I think there is a over-reliance from people who are like, okay, generative AI is going to solve accessibility. And I will say that with my whole chest. There is no way generative AI is going to solve all for accessibility. Am I someone that's like, AI has absolutely no use? I'm not going to say that. To be honest, I don't really believe that. There are some uses that are out there. I know Be My Eyes is something that I use that uses AI, which is kind of great when I'm taking pictures and stuff because I can't see it, and have it described. It does a fantastic job, and that is AI driven, and I really like that. And other people who are blind and visually impaired who use BMIs it's been really positive. But there has been this thread that has been kind of weaving itself around of like, again, AI will solve everything when it comes to accessibility, so you won't have to worry about it. And I really, really don't like that, because it's trying to enforce that accessibility as an afterthought, that it's going to be solved like by magic. The same thing where happened with overlays, where it's like, oh, overlays are going to solve your accessibility needs, which has turned out is not true, as certain news has come out lately about lawsuits in the FTC wanting to fine companies who have put forth that idea that overlays can solve everything and, prevent you from like legal liability.
Don't you love how it's going to get rid of developers? It's going to solve accessibility, world hunger, like climate change. Like it's just out here. It's magical. It's doing everything. Not like it's just math or anything and compute power, but like,
That's the thing, is that when it comes to the internet, there's a lot that's missing about disability and accessibility on the internet. And this is where this AI is getting trained from. This data is either missing or it's ableist, it's incorrect. An AI can't mimic someone with a disability if the data that it has access that it's generated from is flawed.
Oh, just wait. Meta's going to come out with an AI bot that is disabled, deaf, in like 5 different colors. And they're going to be like, but we know. We know. Did you see that? Like, I about died. Like, they were like, she's a Black woman and a lesbian and she's a single mom. And I was like, well, dang, we fit all 3. Like, okay.
I didn't even know, because I remember Be My Eyes. Like, I remember when the app came out, and it's all about like connecting visually impaired with someone that like a real world, and like as a person that had good vision, you could sign up to be the other connection of that. I didn't know they had an AI component of it.
I wonder if it would help with your color, with the fact that you're colorblind.
No, they're just gonna say it's like blue, and I'm like, well, I don't know what blue looks like. It's fine, but like I didn't know that Be My Eyes works on the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. That's really cool. Like to make that not only like, hey, I need some help here, but also make it convenient is a really cool, like I think the more that shifts into this isn't a hassle is a better thing for everyone, of just like, oh, guess what? I don't have to go through 18 different hoops to then say like, I need to like cross the street right now. Right?
I think to streamline it into everyday life and make it easy to make it a part of your day to assist you is what could really help. Like a lot of the fact that we're using image detection and stuff like that, like being able to detect something that's coming in front of you. But like, I wish that was more of what the focus is, because AI could be really rad. Like we could use AI to help people. And instead of being like, let's use it to find immigrants and to try to hunt people, let's use it to help people cross the street, y'all. I swear, Elmo needs to talk to like half the adults in the world, because I can't with it.
I usually have like, what is that on my floor? And it's usually like, it is a fluff ball. Like it's a fluff. And that's
is this a bug? Is this a sock?
Yes. I am totally like, what is that? And like, I never, when Be My Eyes, I never use the portion where, you would call someone to have you, because I'm like, I got trust issues. I'm like, no, I don't want you. But soon as I could use something that is like, it's just, I'm like, cool. I'm like, I'll use it till I'm like, is it, because that's a lot of it. It's like, what's this say on the side of like this thing, of this bottle? Yeah, is that a bug?
See, I wish people would ask, hey, what could we do and how could we implement this to make your life better? Because guess what? That's also going to be more profitable, right? If it has a real use, it will still be more profitable than just making weird cartoons on the internet.
Our first guest on the show, Kelsey, he was just sending on Blue Sky the other day. The future of AI is whatever makes the most money.
But that's all tech. This is a business, bro. Like, I have to give a talk about why to include women in things. We're 51% of the population. What do you mean? And what business do you just not care about your audience, or 87% of discretional fund like spending? Like, what do you mean? I've been following you on Twitter for so long, and then to Blue Sky, because the Twitter's the bad place now. Okay, your blog on anxiety. First of all, the picture you have behind you is my favorite of your profile pictures. It is the cutest freaking picture ever. And then your blog on anxiety, there's a whole part of the blog where she like monologues and starts talking about who would play her in the movie and the moment she's having, and it's Keke Palmer, but like, or like a hologram of Eartha Kitt. I have never been so consumed by a piece of reading. There's a Beyonce moment in this. I've never felt so seen. It is fire. So the whole time you're like, I worked in journalism. I was like, were you a writer? Because damn girl, I was like, I went there for tech content. I didn't know what I was getting. Who is she? Can we be bestie? Break My Soul from Beyonce is in here, okay? There's a whole monologue. She said that not only would her cats will be played by Black Dog with little self-preservation and even fewer teeth. Whose sentence is that?
Well, Shadowmere has no link. He's with my ex now, but he has like a little tooth. He has one little snaggletooth.
This is the most fire paragraph of anything that I have ever read in my life. Okay, in the last part about how Kiki's sitting on a chair and like smoking cigarettes, not that you smoke, but because that's the tropes that it was so I pictured it. Okay, like my brain was there. I had a whole out of body like experience and visual. It made my entire life.
Yeah, that was the summer the building's elevator tried to kill everybody and it was a whole thing. It kept trying to set itself on fire. So I was having I was going through it.
I'm so glad that you didn't die in the elevator, and I am so glad that we got this gem out of you not dying in an elevator. I was sitting here like trying not to be late for my kids' awards and like in between meetings like this is amazing. Also, Keke Palmer should so play you, and like I just saw her hair be like just a little bit messed up because she gotta look good, right? Because it's a movie, but then like look, chef's kisses.
Where should they find you online? Where should they read this blog? We can have links in the show notes, but we can tell them too.
I'm on Blue Sky. It's like Scopic Engineer at whatever the ending of Blue Sky is. And then my website, crystalpreston.watson.com. And then from there, you can get to my blog from there, but you also can do A11Y Savvy, and that takes you to my Accessibility Savvy blog. I do longer form, so I don't blog constantly. I usually, because sometimes other than when I'm having an existential crisis, I do a lot of research with my blogs. So I did one, if you want to read about why porn needs to be accessible, I've done a blog about that. And that required me to go deep into this.
Accessibility has never been so interesting, y'all. Like I just want you to know, like I was over there with like popcorn. Like I was just like, what?
I'll probably have some more stuff coming. I'm definitely having some more stuff coming.
Please write more things. I want to read them with just full excitement and enthusiasm. It gave me life. Okay, I was so bored this morning. I was on a second cup of coffee, just like, this is amazing. Do you have any advice for making security more accessible so it can be better used so people don't feel the need to just go around it?
People in security really need to talk with people with disabilities. I mean, because I know I've done some probably stuff that's like, this is not really a good infosec, but I'm going to do it because it's not accessible. But I think that's the biggest thing. There's nothing technological wise I can really say that would make as big of a difference is to really talk to disabled users and really understand how, when things aren't inaccessible, how that can cause security risk and security issues.
We should do a talk together about security and accessibility.
I would love that. I once worked for, like a federated ID company. And so that's kind of where I got really interested about, InfoSec and stuff like that. And that's why I've always kind of, in back of my mind with accessibility, I'm just like, got to keep that in mind and making sure that we're thinking about accessibility, even though it's like, well, you can't, there's no back end code for accessibility, but it's like, yeah, but there's a lot of things you still need to think about when it comes to disabled people and information security as well.
Crystal, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fork Around and Find Out. If you like this show, please consider sharing it with a friend, a coworker, a family member, or even an enemy. However we get the word out about this show helps it to become sustainable for the long term. If you want to sponsor this show, please go to fafo.fm/sponsor and reach out to us there about what you're interested in sponsoring and how we can help. We hope your systems stay available and your pagers stay quiet. We'll see you again next time.